Brilliant. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Amy Shakespeare. I am the WAVE project manager at Cornwall Museums Partnership. The WAVE project, for those of you who don't know, is a coastal communities funded project which is run by the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Local Enterprise Partnership alongside Cornwall Museums Partnership and Falmouth University. There are two sides to the project. One seeks to create immersive experiences at 5 museums in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and the other side is running sessions like today's where we introduce businesses to the potential of immersive technology. These were in-person workshops, but due to circumstances beyond our control, they are now webinars, but it's great to be able to open them up more broadly, nationally and even internationally, so that more businesses can get the benefits of the free sessions. Today will be recorded, but we can't see any of you and you are all on mute. So you won't be in the final video, but it will be uploaded to YouTube afterwards, so you can recap and share with any of your colleagues. For those of you who aren't familiar with Zoom webinar, at the bottom of your screen there's a chat button, which means that you can chat either directly to myself and Katie or to the other attendees. There's also a Q&A button, and if you have any questions throughout the session, post them in there. If you see another question that someone else has posted, do click upvote, because it will be easier for us to filter some of the questions if we're running low on time. Katie's going to do a presentation first and then followed by a Q&A session. So we might not get to your questions until the end of the conversation. And if you want to pop on and ask a more in-depth question and chat to Katie, you can use the raise hand function and we'll be able to turn on your microphone and or their camera. I'm really delighted to welcome Katie Goode from Triangular Pixels. They have a brilliant reputation as game developers based in Cornwall. They've won lots and lots of awards, including the BAFTA for Breakthrough Brits. And I know that she's prepared a brilliant presentation showing the different applications that there are for virtual reality. So I will stop talking and hand over to Katie, and I'll be back for the Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you. So shall I begin? So at Triangular Pixels, we do a range of different games and experiences. We create both our own IP. So Smash It Plunder was a PlayStation 4 title for PlayStation VR. Untitled Diplomacy was our first title for PC. We also work with different businesses and enterprises outside our own, doing work for hire. So we created the tutorial software for HTC, teaching people how to use HTC Vive at different kiosks. And also we create various different tools for Unity, which is the game engine that we use. And yeah, we've done a few things and been a few places, basically. As you say, BAFTA Breakthrough Brits, and also Untitled Diplomacy got nominated for BAFTA for innovation as well. So this is just going to be the overview of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start with what real-time VR is, why we should use it, showing you about how to get software and the hardware, how we make good real-time VR, a few case studies, and then we'll have our QA. So just disclose what real-time is. Now, most programming you find, so for example, when you go on the internet and you look at a web page, that's not real-time. What happens is that you basically ask a page to load and it appears, and then nothing's necessarily happening on that sort of page. Nothing's being updated, it's just showing you information. The reason why I'm saying real-time is because our code has to create things on the fly. It has to be reacting to you all the time. And with VR, this is where it gets a bit different. So you might have heard of using 360 pictures or 360 video. Those are different in the sense that they tend to be either static images or video that's on rails. In other words, you are just floating along in a particular place, wherever the camera is. Whereas real-time experiences allow the user to be anywhere, at any time, in any way they want. Real-time experiences are the only sort of experiences that have full interactivity. They are super dynamic, they allow you total freedom, you can interact with anything, you can do anything. 360 pictures and video is basically whatever the camera is capturing. We can't magic a camera out of nowhere, whereas real-time VR experiences allow you to go wherever you want. 360 pictures and video is basically whatever exists in the real world, although you could potentially do something CG, whereas real-time experiences, we can just create anything. Anything you want, doesn't have to exist, could be anytime, etc. 360 pictures and video as well can be quite solo experiences. It can be a little hard to synchronize lots of people watching the media at the same time. You certainly don't see each other within that experience, whereas real-time experiences allow any number of users all at the same time, all interacting with each other, or whatever you would like. And in terms of cost to your business of getting these things made, basically you can have a 360 video which costs more than a real-time experience, or vice versa. It's completely dependent on the content, not necessarily dependent too much on how it's made. So something that I guess might come up in your head is basically, do real-time experiences have to look like a video game? And the real-time experiences basically don't. First of all, you can use something called photogrammetry, which I believe there's been a talk about before, which is taking basically hundreds or thousands of pictures of a place, recreating, using software to basically then create a 3D model of the environment or the object you want to explore. And then we use real-time code on top of that to allow you to explore and potentially interact with some fake virtual objects in there. We can do CG, of course. So this middle experience is the IKEA VR experience, where they try to create something that looks as realistic as possible. And then you can go completely stylized with real time. So this is Expect You to Die, which is a video game, but you can see it looks incredibly stylized and looks like a comic. So we can do basically anything you would like. I have an excellent non-games example of what real-time can really offer here, which is actually on the production of The Mandalorian. So what you see here is actually the real camera, and they filmed the whole thing on a virtual set. So there is a massive, this is where the whole thing was filmed. And watching The Mandalorian, you would never guess that this was not a real set. And as you can see, they're literally just walking around this environment. So things this allowed them to do is basically change the environment on the fly. It allowed things to come in and out of the environment. It allowed the actors to see exactly where they should be filmed rather than trying to be around green screens. And it was, I mean, it's basically the future of how I feel like a lot of film is going to go. But this was all actually made in a game engine, which is, I guess, why it was quite revolutionary and different. So the other question I get asked is, does it need to be on a games controller? Well, no, is the other answer to that. So first of all, VR controllers are different in themselves anyway. So you've got the Vive and Oculus controllers, both of which track your hands in 3D space, both of which use buttons. The Valve Index controller is quite different. Basically, you strap your hand in, if I throw it around, strap your hand in, and it detects your finger motion. So it's got little touch sensors here, but it also detects if your finger is further away. So you actually, as you curl your fingers round, it's detecting that. So the main way that we actually use the Valve Index controllers, rather than using the buttons that are on it, we just get people to pick things up like that and just touch things with their fingers like that. And then a lot of the VR headsets now also allow for complete hand tracking, which means no controls at all. We just pick up your hands, and you can just pick up and move objects with your hands. Of course, the other option is you don't need necessarily any sort of interaction. You can just have the headset and people just moving around with their own head and body, not even having to pick up their hands, and that can still be a completely valid real-time experience. So why do we want real-time? Well, real-time VR can be used for a ridiculous amount of different experiences and uses. The reason is because we can create anything and do anything with it. The way that I'd like to try and explain this is when you think of all the different uses that we have through a flat TV screen, with virtual reality and real-time VR, you can literally add another dimension to that. Like, that's how many uses that we have. We can also recreate things that you do in real life. For example, when we're training or doing some sort of education, we could be modeling, or we can do in art. We could be testing things, user testing, or doing pre-visualization. We could do some marketing or playing, or even just remote working, which is obviously quite current right now. So real-time VR is excellent at examination, first of all. This is getting really up close to objects, inspecting objects, being able to interact with objects. Here you can see an example of a surgery training simulation, which the user can obviously get apart, God knows what that is, and have a real peek and poke at it, and really get close. Now, if this is a 360 video, they wouldn't be able to move their head towards the object. Being real time, they can move their head around the object however they wish, and they can actually interact with the object. It's great for environment exploration as well. So if maybe your product is more of a space rather than an object, you can allow people to walk around that space or object. Left would be a training facility. If you maybe have people at home who need training in a nuclear power station, then maybe you can train them at home by just allowing them to walk around a virtual nuclear power station. And then on the right here is so-called the Room VR, which it allows them to basically move around a museum, a virtual museum. Imagine that being ancient Egypt or ancient Rome. It can be literally anywhere, and you can move anywhere within that space. If the users want to, they can put their head underneath the table, which is something that ultimately no other type of 360 video can do, because you're not under control of that video. Real-time VR is also excellent for creation in the first place. Typically, when it comes to 3D modeling and a 2D screen, you have to be pretty skilled to be able to do it. It is a high-skilled job because you're trying to imagine a 3D object and realizing it on a 2D screen, and you can't move your head around it. That's really, really hard. And like all the tools, basically using a 2D interface, using a 2D mouse to make a 3D object, it doesn't work very well, which is the reason why you need to be really skilled and train up to do it. Whereas we've got so many different kinds of art and creation software now, and modeling software in virtual reality, Realtime VR allows you to literally draw in 3D space and have that hover or float or act under gravity, whatever you want it to do. So as a non-artist, I find it so much easier now to create and imagine and show someone like the object I want to create by just sketching it up in VR. Just draw it, it's simple, and then I get someone else to potentially just model it if they want them to do it nicer. Different types of modeling programs. So you've got Tilt Brush, which is like very, very arty and it's like putting down ink and paper, lights. You've got Oculus Medium, which is very much more clay. Gravity Sketch, which is much more product designy. So there's stuff for all like different types of medium, I guess, in VR for any sort of creation you want to do. Real-time VR is also excellent for empathy. Ultimately, if you're asking someone to perform an action and you're getting them to do it themselves, and you can see the result of the action of that kid actually crying in front of you because as a police officer you've been too mean to them or something, then that has so much more greater effect on you than you just watching a film or trying to do some fake role play. It just feels so much visceral and real. So with empathy as well in VR, it could be you doing the action yourself, it could be people doing actions in front of you and you need to sort of come in and help. But ultimately, it's all about being so real that you feel so close to someone that's in there that it just hits home so much easier. Social is also an excellent use for VR, or social in VR is also excellent. So you can have multiple people being in VR together, which is the most obvious case. They could be in the same place, they could be in different places, doesn't matter. They could literally be on opposite sides of the world, but being in VR together and having virtual representations of themselves. Because the user is literally moving the controllers and moving their heads themselves and the voice coming out of those avatars, they feel so real. They're in there with you. Like, there is no difference. The other use of social in VR is having so-called accomplice applications or companion applications, where some people might be in VR and some people might not be in VR but joining in. So in our previous game, Smash It Plunder, we actually had someone in VR and like going around first person, and then other people can join in on the TV screen. And the people on the TV screen, it felt like just like a normal video game for them. But the person in VR felt like it was actually their friends in there with them, and they weren't just alone in there. And it was a very social experience, all playing together. And then, of course, there's the point of like just having one person in VR basically broadcasting out to everybody else. So that's something that's quite hot in Asia at the moment, is basically puppeteering virtual avatars, like virtual YouTubers, basically, and having yourself in VR controlling a virtual avatar who's doing like whatever YouTubers do, like voiceover, like video or music, dances or whatever. I think it's someone called Miku is a really big one. So also the other benefit of real-time VR is basically the ability to have a repeatable experience. So would you believe when we're training firefighters, we literally set something on fire and we stick them in it. This is obviously not very scalable. It's very expensive. It's potentially very dangerous. And obviously it needs a lot of specialist equipment. And at the moment, it's something that could be quite hard to do, especially very hard to do in your own space. So what we can do is recreate that training in virtual reality. You can still wear all the heavy equipment, still control a heavy nozzle object if you really want the visual physical experience, but the virtual experience will allow us to play out a scenario for you. We can see exactly how you're doing in the scenario. We can see where you're even gazing. We can check on your vitals. We could be pausing the experience and rewinding bits and replaying bits together to see how you can improve on your training. We can have multiple people in different parts of the world joining in your training session, so you're fighting the same fire together. So you can see how this can be just an incredible, useful tool. So how can we get you on board? So I'm going to go through just a few bits of hardware, which are basically modern bits of hardware that you can actually buy, because there's been a few headsets now that have been discontinued because there's new versions out. So the entry-level PC, so the benefit of developing and using PC is obviously software is a lot easier to get hold of, and it's a lot easier to develop for. The downside is you have to have a PC, so that's buying a laptop, that's buying a desktop. With entry-level PC headsets, such as the Oculus Rift S and the HTC Vive Cosmos, which I have here, they use cameras on board the headsets to track their position. So it's still wired to the computer, which is obviously a bit of a downside having a wire, but the upside is there's no extra external sensors that you need to connect up. Another downside is that means that tracking isn't quite as good. So what I mean is, like, you're moving your head around, you're moving your controllers around, and sometimes it just drops a little bit. It can stutter a little bit. It can wave a little bit. But it's fine for most users. Most users won't necessarily notice it. Also, not necessarily great for some bits of training, depending on your experience. If you stick your hand behind your head, for example, it won't detect it because all the cameras are basically at the front. If you are trying to choose between the two as a business, I would be potentially siding on the Vive Cosmos side, because basically the Oculus is run by Facebook, and therefore in terms of privacy you might not be able to get what you need for your customers. Also, the software basically does need to connect to Facebook, which obviously has its downsides. In terms of professional PC units though, if you are a business, I would seriously suggest getting a HTC Vive Pro or Pro I. They have proper enterprise editions of those headsets, which means they have proper enterprise support. But for these other headsets, they're also equally as good, just as kits. In fact, my preference here is the Vive Index, just because of those controllers. The difference with these headsets is that they basically all use a little black box, as you can see in the background, and what that does is produce a laser grid, and so they don't need to be connected to the computer at all. But then the headsets themselves and the controllers themselves pick up their position in that laser grid and send that back to the computer. This means that their tracking is spot on, basically. Super accurate, super responsive. They're not interfered with when it comes to light. So the other headsets, when it comes to like streaming daylight through our windows, they can drop and misbehave a lot. Whereas these ones, they will just carry on working. By the way, Vive Cosmos and the Vive Cosmos Elite, that's just a different faceplate you can actually interchange. So if you are demoing at events on PC, you might want to swap to the old camera faceplate, just so you don't have to try setting up lighthouses at some other event. But if you're having a slightly more permanent space, then using the lighthouses is like the most optimal thing you want to be doing. Then we've got the completely left ring devices. So these are completely standalone. There's no wires. The computer is basically in the headset. They're both basically running on Android. The problem there is it's is a lot slower to develop applications for, which means it's going to cost your business more money to make applications for this. It's very hard to distribute applications for. But the upside is that they're obviously completely wireless, which means they're so easy to just take to some event and just stick it on someone's head. There's no setup at all required. You don't need a PC anywhere near anything. Again, they're both used inside-out tracking, so that's the cameras, which means that the tracking isn't quite so hot all the time. Like it can lose focus on the controllers as well. You stick your hands behind. The difference between these two is, again, like the one on the left, the Oculus is Facebook, which basically means you need Facebook accounts, and these are like personal Facebook accounts as well. So they are trying to do a Oculus for Business, which we're all signed up for, which allows enterprise users to distribute and make apps for the Oculus Quest. The problem there is that basically you can't use then the consumer store, and also there's a monthly fee associated with that. Whereas the HTC, again, are much more enterprise focused. You can't really get this headset as a consumer, but that also means a consumer is much more less likely to have one. And so if you're actually more B2C rather than B2B, then you probably want to be looking at the Quest. Also, the Focus Plus is being replaced hopefully pretty soon with the HTC Photon, which is, as you can see, pretty darn sexy. So in terms of you getting software, you want to be looking at actually the software you might already use day to day. So I know that, for example, I think it's called Rivet, is an architectural software that obviously architects use, that actually has a VR mode already there, ready for you to use. So you just need to download the add-on or enable it in some way, and if you've got a headset connected, you can then wander around your environment you're creating and designing in virtual reality. Great. Otherwise, you'll be looking at trying to get VR software via different online stores. I'll go through some of those options in a second. The other option is to obviously get your own software custom made by a game studio. So I'm saying game studio because at the end of the day, if you look at a real-time application, games developers are doing real-time application since computers existed in 1964 or something. So like we've been doing real-time for a long time. And so we know how to make sure that you stay comfortable and how to make a experience run at a good frame rate. And in terms of development time, you're probably talking about 4 weeks from start to finish for like something small, just to get briefing done and just a bit of iteration time. We've created the game in 6 weeks. That was Unseen Diplomacy. But then our other game, Smash Plunder, took 4 years. So completely massive scale of how long something could take. And then the other option is there's actually a surprising amount of like VR packages. You can just download yourself for free and start making your own software if you would like. So in terms of buying software, in terms of games at least, I can say that there's Viveport, the Oculus Store, Steam, and PlayStation VR. In terms of businesses, obviously a lot of business software tends to be sold directly through the business itself. So this is all the B2C places you can put your software on at least. So the IKEA experience that I showed you just, that's actually available up on Steam for all gamers and non-gamers to actually use and buy, and actually it's free, so it's good. In terms of making it yourself, the two engines that are used in the industry really a lot is Unity and Unreal. Unreal was the one that was actually done on the set of The Mandalorian, which is what I showed you earlier. Unity is the one that we work in. And even just if you just browse the Facebook website, like you will find the downloads of Uti and Real SDKs for you to try out. You can also use intermediate software such as VRTK, which tries to make it even easier to make your own virtual reality software. Really, you can just give it a go. There's so many tutorials out there. You can get something really easy of just exploring the space done really, really quick. It's really fun. Just give it a go. So if you are going to be looking at what virtual reality software is out there, or if you're going to be making your own, there's one term you need to know about, and that's immersion. So what is immersion? Basically, if you're reading a book or watching a film and you feel so closely related to characters, you imagine those people when you go to sleep, you're watching an experience, you feel like so much empathy for them that you're sweating almost yourself. Video games, obviously, it's so much more easier to get absorbed and immersed because really immersed, where if you have like we've seen it before, there's a virtual reality table, they're inside VR, and they're done with the game, and they take off the controllers and they put them on the virtual table and they drop to the floor because it's a virtual table. The table doesn't actually exist. That's when you know when someone's super immersed in that world and really believes it's real. Along all this, it's generally much more memorable and you have much better learning. So when you're at school and you're getting taught things, if you just read it in a book, like how much, you remember how basically much stuff would sink in. Not much potentially, if anything would sink in. If you watch a TV show or documentary about something, then a bit more sinks in. You get the visuals, you get the sounds, like you can get there. Having someone role play something like a teacher or getting you to do an actual experiment, then you start really actually learning. It's like, okay, I'm getting my hands dirty, I understand how to do this now. And so the more visceral, more actions you're getting the user to do, like visual, audio, touch, sound, just everything, movement, then that leads to the user learning so much more and taking in much more. So for good VR, the things that we're looking at is basically we like to give the users a sense of control and so we call that agency. It basically means like being able to move themselves around, being able to do what they would do in real life. If you're forcing them to do something particular, like along one route, then they might not feel like it's them in there and they can sort of break out of this immersion a bit. We like to obviously make sure they're very comfortable, so they're making them sick. We want to reward them. This is all about, you might have heard gamification. This is simple things such as if they try to interact with something, they can actually interact with that thing. Making sure it just feels very tactile. So, you know, simple things like if you drop something, you should be able to hear the object actually drop. And like if you try and use like a virtual chainsaw, you should be able to feel the rumble in the controllers. Just little things like that. We also need to keep you immersed. We need to make sure that your virtual world is consistent and believable and basically meets your expectations as well. So a good example of that would be the virtual reality glass on the virtual reality table. It's full of water, and if I go to reach for it and my hand just goes straight through it, it doesn't interact, it doesn't move at all, obviously, like that just completely destroys my immersion. Like I'm like, oh, this place is fake, this isn't real, And so your learning drops, your level of enjoyment drops, and you just sort of take everything else with a bit of a pinch of salt. So we need to make sure that that world isn't necessarily like super realistic visually, like we can get away with like stylized stuff, but at least behaves consistently. And so you know the rules of that world. We also have to make sure that we do things such as making sure we get all our objects right in terms of scale. So a good example of this was when we were pretty early in VR, like we created a virtual environment, but it didn't feel real, even though it's like, this feels like it should be real. Like I'm walking through somewhere, why doesn't this feel real? And I realized because all the scale was slightly off and all the doors were too low, and it felt like I was like clipping my head through the doorways all the time. So we fixed the height of the doorways and fixed the height of the scale. I was like, suddenly this felt more real again. We have actually tried to experiment before about making people feel really tiny. So we tried to make you feel like a toddler again. So put you in a giant sand pit with giant versions of all the old classic toys that you had. And that actually didn't work. And that's because you know your own body proportions. And it turns out when you're a baby and a toddler, your body proportions are different, not just your size. So it just felt like a giant world rather than we were small again. The other thing you want to be cautious of is being so visceral and real, making sure that the users actually have a safe space to go to escape from the experience. So being able to pause, or a good example would be if it's a horror story that you're trying to tell, then making sure they basically can switch on the light. So little things as well, just making sure that we don't have any sort of flashing weird bugs in the games or any glitches, things like that, to make sure we keep that level of immersion. So you might have heard of as well is simulator sickness. So the reasons why we get motion sick and simulator sick is mainly of 3 different ways we found. So we did lots of research into basically biology but before, and just as VR was kicking off like a few years ago now. One of the things that we found was when you're sitting on a train and you're looking out the window and you're getting like that, you know, it's going really fast and you're getting that sort of flickering eye movement. That flickering eye movement can cause you to feel really uncomfortable and sick. Apparently it's to do with like causing strain on some optic nerve, which is actually somehow connected to your stomach. I don't know how much you believe that, but obviously that movement is still uncomfortable. So any sort of experience where it's like lots of things flashing past your eyes, you want to be very careful of. The main one we found is basically when you have a mismatch between the forces that you're experiencing in real life and the forces that you're experiencing in virtual reality. So VR roller coasters might sound like an amazing, awesome idea, but they're actually horrific for the user. They will make you absolutely hell. And that's not just because it's a roller coaster, that's because you're experiencing forces that you should be feeling in real life, but you're not. So especially when you go around on a turn, you expect like, and the turn's like this, goes flat, you expect them to feel the sideways movement, and of course your body isn't experiencing that, so that's going to make you hurl. Simple thing you could do is just bank the turns so that, because obviously gravity is pulling you down, if you bank the turns, then it feels like the centrifugal force is still pulling you down into your seat, which is actually what's happening in real life. And of course then the other thing is when you've got a slow frame rate, when the screen isn't updating as fast as it should be, when like the screen freezes, all those sort of annoying glitches, basically makes you feel drunk if the game or experience is running slow, and obviously that can make you feel very sick as well. So a great example that we found, that an experiment that someone did back in 2008, was basically having a virtual reality experience where they put people within star fields. And the star field on the left, so lots of stars coming towards you, it's just someone sitting there, and all the stars were coming at a constant rate. So there was no acceleration, it was just a constant rate of stars coming towards you. And then on the right, they had a star field going in and out, all the time, in and out. And you know from your gut now that the one on the right is going to make you feel horrific. And yes, it does. So it makes people feel more nauseous, it gives people more eye strain, and it makes people feel very disorientated. But interestingly, the one on the left also is still fairly nauseous, it still causes eye strain, and still very disorientating. I mean, there was no floor, there was no ceiling, there's no walls, you still had things going past your eyes, you still had that flickering movement, and it still felt like you were still moving forward. So as developers, there's lots of things that we can do to make sure that you're comfortable in virtual reality. So we can make sure that people don't feel ill. So this is certainly, you have to remember, is virtual reality itself, the hardware will not make you feel sick now, because we've got good enough headsets, we've got good enough PCs. It's only the individual experience that you're playing that would make you feel ill. And so if that happens, and it can happen at different points for different people, then change the experience or fix it in software in some way. So there's simple things that we have to do on the left, which is what we have to do for everybody, so making sure we've got the game or experience updating very quickly for you, and making sure we don't freeze the screen. GeForce down only is that banking turn I was talking about, just making sure that we're not forcing the user to experience any fake forces. A simple one of just making sure that only the user can decide when they move. So you're not forcing someone around, they're controlling where they move and where they want to go to. And then there's more interesting ones, such as blink movement is when we sort of teleport you in little steps rather than letting you smoothly walk somewhere. And of course, other things like making sure there's a big cockpit around you, so you have a tiny little window to look at. You're not going to get sick by looking out a tiny little window. Then again, you're not going to experience anything. So a word that you might hear bashed around with real-time experiences is something called locomotion, and this is basically the action of players and how they're going to be teleporting themselves around somewhere. So the one on the left, I don't know what it's called, arm swinger or something, but basically the player uses the trigger buttons and the action of their hands moving up and down to move somewhere. On the one on the left, you see that it gives them lots of analog control, and it can be more immersive because at the end of the day, they're not just teleporting somewhere magically, but at the same time, they're experiencing acceleration as they go up to a speed, and then deceleration as they go down, and they have movement past their eyes. All that can make them feel very ill. The one on the right is the other extreme, which is basically teleporting, which is absolutely fine for like the majority of experiences. But obviously it has its downsides. It can make the world feel really small. People can get through your experience potentially very quickly if you're not careful. It can also make them feel not quite as immersive, because obviously I've got this sudden ability to be able to teleport somewhere. It also stops people from actually moving themselves around the space. So Unseen Diplomacy was different because we didn't have any sort of locomotion. We changed the environment around you instead. So for that, we kept people much more immersed. They couldn't feel sick, but they also wouldn't be able to teleport a massive distance. They had to have a large physical space. But with teleporting, as you see, there's no acceleration. There is displacement, but no actual acceleration. So therefore, people will not get sick in that experience. So quickly about trying to keep people immersed when it comes to menus and UI. you want to try and keep potentially as much UI as possible within the world if you're creating a story. We have a great example of, we were trying to just figure out where to put time and show how much time you had left in an experience. I mean, this is very old art, by the way, like years old, so ignore how awful it looks. But we had time up on a wall, and we thought, yeah, look, it's massive. Who's going to miss that? Well, turns out when they're busy right next to the bookcase, they're completely ignoring the time above them. Some people won't look up at all in the slightest. Like, it doesn't matter how big you have it on the wall, people might not even notice it. So we ended up moving it to like the back of your hand and just testing it there, almost like a watch, which was awesome. Like, because when you go and ask someone to check the time, like a lot of people would just try and check their watch or their phone. So that naturally worked because that's what people do in real life. But then we found we needed to add much more information, like rather than just the amount of time you had. So we ended up putting a little floating book with you that you sort of carried with you that showed all the information that you needed, so we could have more space to do that sort of thing. But then you can go like completely in world when it comes to your menus. So this was the menu for choosing what item you want to use. You literally have a roll out little folding leather book thing, basically, and you just pick up the object you want and then you just put it back if you want to put it back. Like, that's how you would do things in real life. I would physically have a toolbox with me if I wanted to have a set of tools with me. Those seem to fit, I guess, users' expectations much better. It allows people to be much more immersed. The problem with them is the fact that they do take a bit more time to develop potentially. But the upside is you might not have to necessarily teach your users how to interact with your experience. The other thing that we want to do to make sure we keep our users immersed is try and allow them to sort of be themselves or the person that they want to be. We found that if I force them into a body, that can be quite awkward, especially as a woman. If I look down and suddenly my boobs are missing, that's quite shocking, and it doesn't necessarily feel like me in that virtual reality experience, and it breaks me out of that immersion. So think about who the user is. Most VR experiences don't even bother with body, which at first can be a bit odd for the new user, but it's much better than trying to force someone into something. If you are trying to force someone into something, maybe you give context to why they have to be forced into that body. Or you can use, say, if it's the firefighter training, you can't necessarily tell if it's a man's or woman's body because firefighter clothing is so baggy, you could literally cover the body. When it comes to the story or training that you're trying to do, if you're forcing the user to, I don't know, murder a baby for no reason whatsoever, they're probably not going to be able to do it. Like, there's no reason why they feel like they should do it. So you have to give them real reasons to do certain things. Like, you can't, unlike in a video game where you can just do a cutscene and just say, yeah, you're doing this thing because that's what your character's like. You can't do that in VR. You can't just force them to do certain actions. So just be aware of what you're forcing people to do. Hands are obviously very important in interactive VR and real-time VR because they are how you interact with your world. And something that you want to be aware of is basically how those hands are interacting. There's lots of different ways that as a developer we can allow you to pick up an object, but ultimately something has to sort of give, because when I pick up an object, my physical fingers don't go through the object. When I push the object through like the environment static like table or something, like the object doesn't go through the table, and my hand doesn't go through the object when I'm trying to do that, and I feel the force, and it's impossible. I can't physically put this through here. But in VR, there's no physical feedback. There's nothing stopping me from doing something. So we either have to lose some sort of tracking somewhere or some sort of realism somewhere, and you basically have to try and figure out what you want to pick to sort of let go of. So in the Martian and Surgeon Simulator, what they do is they have virtual hands, and if you try and hit that table while you're holding that object, the virtual hand stays there, and your real hand can go somewhere. So you sort of leave your virtual hands behind all the time. I really hate that as a player. I really think it's weird that suddenly my hand is stuck somewhere, that my controller hand is somewhere else. You can sort of give them some context while it's happening. So in Surgeon Simulator, they sort of render this skeleton hand when it starts disconnecting, but it can be quite off-putting. But for then videos, when you're making a video about that virtual experience, it looks really good, because suddenly all the virtual hands aren't intersecting with anything. Everything looks consistent and looks real. In Unseen Diplomacy, we did the opposite. The most important thing for us was making sure that the players had full control over their own hands and full control over any objects that are holding. What this meant was, in terms of realism for videos, it could look not great. It basically meant that you could put the virtual object and virtual hand through the environment, or the virtual environment. But it did mean that I had completely full control over my own hand and my own body and the object I was holding all the time. The other potential way of doing it is basically then disconnecting the object that you're holding from your hand when things start going wrong. So I've got my table here. I've got this is a virtual object, by the way. Virtual object, and then I've got my virtual hand, and I start putting my virtual hand, pushing it against the virtual table. The object would stay there, the virtual hand would go through the table, and sort of they would just disconnect, and the object would fall or whatever under gravity. And so basically you end up sort of disconnecting the object away from the virtual hand. The other thing you can do is keep it connected, but then like it's sort of like under a weird tether, like a fishing line connected to it, so you can still sort of drag it around. This is great for allowing like the user to still feel like they've got hands like that are theirs in virtual reality, but it's not so great in terms of the control that you have over the object. You might be holding a I don't know, like a glass or something, and walk through a doorway and suddenly realise you've left the glass behind because your hand accidentally went through the doorway. You just didn't notice because you can't feel it. So basically you have to pick one. It's up to you and whoever developer is doing it. So and let's go back to some case studies for a bit now. At the moment, one of the experiences that we're working on is using real-time VR in a place called the Serena, which is basically it's a mental health hospital for young people. They become residents in that place. They are therefore essentially trapped, potentially under not their own choice a lot of the time. And so we're working with the NHS, who are the ones that are actually driving this experience, to create environments which allow young people basically a sense of their own space in these places, allow them to, if they're having a panic attack or something, try and just calm down, and giving them a sense of control back. So things that were important for the experience that we created. The first one was the Zen Garden. Being a Zen Garden, obviously you hopefully find it relaxing. The main thing that we found out when we were doing the workshop with a lot of the young adults was basically this feeling of some of them wanted to go around Sainsbury's and just shop. Like some of them wanted to go around Sainsbury's and like put things back on the shelves and make it neat, and then some of them wanted to destroy the place. And this is also the same reason why Minecraft is incredibly popular. It's basically giving young people and kids the sense of control back. It's the reason why they enjoy having their own rooms. It's the reason why they want to decorate their own rooms. They don't normally get a lot of choice in life. They're definitely forced to do a lot of things they don't want to do. So giving these young people a like ability to control their environment was super important. So what they can do is they can mess around with some wind chimes or bounce some balls around. They've got Zen garden like sand, so they can actually just draw in the sand. They can make a mess of it. They can draw willies if they want to, but they can just clean it all up. They can just clean up the garden. But basically, it can even do things like change the time of day in there if they want to. They basically almost like have not superpowers, but they have much more control over the environment as they normally would. And in the other environments that we're doing, we're looking at all the different ways we can give them that sense of agency and control again. And obviously, you wouldn't be able to do this in a 360 video VR experience. You cannot give people a sense of control when they're just watching something. Like the reason why people do gardening is because they like being out, having a sense of control, controlling their environment, creating something. And we're allowing those young people to do that with real-time VR. A very different example was we knew some people at Tremor Design, and they knew that we were doing VR. They saw the potential for VR incredibly early on. We managed to get them some very early access to some kit before it was actually released. And basically we created a pre-visualization of a building that was just only partly finished and partly being built. And what this allowed them to do was show the client the building to scale, be able to walk around it, being able to explore exactly the place that they're making, having being able to iterate on the design a little bit, tweak some things, change the colors, change the scale of how big the surfaces want to be, and best thing of all for Tremor Design was the ability to go to a expo for architects and an event and show off the actual building, which obviously they normally can't do. Normally at an architect expo, they have pictures, they have videos and walkthroughs of environment. They don't normally get to take the environment to the expo. And so they were insanely popular at that expo. They got loads of clients. They got invited to like national ones and all sorts. So they did incredibly well at that. And now they offer the VR as a optional extra to the architect work that they do for clients. It's like, would you like to do like the VR walkthrough? Would you like to iterate it in VR and experience it in VR? And you can see how powerful that can be to offer that optional extra. And then the other completely other left-wing thing that we've done is actually for a local artist. She came to us, Alice came to us, basically knowing that VR was interesting, but had no concept of what it could do, all the weird things that she could do with it. And she just knows she wanted to use it in her art in some way. So we showed her like all the possibilities. We showed her photogramming, we showed her CG, we showed her stylized stuff. We showed her all the ability to do things like, you know what, you don't need the user to use the VR controller. Someone else can have the VR controller, and you can like put it into like a teddy bear and like render it as like a monster in VR. So if you try to show someone the teddy bear in real life, they're trying to run away from it in VR because they see it somewhere different. You mess around with all sorts of things. You can have the 2D screen or projector, and it could be showing a completely different experience to that in virtual reality, or the same experience. You can have people outside VR, all these different weird combinations, and basically guided her to where she wanted to create an experience where basically she had the real world and you put on the VR headset and there was like the real world basically identical, but with like, it's basically like Spot the Difference, effectively, can I describe it? Where there was just like slight alterations and weird music when you were moving your head around the virtual space. We would have like triggers and of different music and different sounds would trigger as you walked around the space, depending on where you were. So you could sort of see people almost following their own sort of musical path, as it were, through the experience. So again, just using VR in a completely different way to the other ones that we had worked with. In the case of the current situation, I guess, it'd be great to basically just show you the entire workflow you could possibly do in VR. So the first of all is obviously if you have, say, like a factory or something, and you want to make sure that people, that you still want to hire new people, you still know you're going to have to hire new people, but unfortunately the factory's closed, how are you going to train them? You could potentially recreate the factory in VR, allow your new staff to be able to go through and be able to show people, be there with them, and actually show them in VR how to use the equipment, train them how to use the equipment. Obviously, like meeting virtually with others, like being able to have a physical presence with someone in there face to face. There's been quite a few expos now that have been completely in VR, where there is literally a virtual audience. They are literally sitting down, they have to actually put their hands up if they want to talk and things like that. But also just things like having as many virtual whiteboards as you want, or post-it note boards, and being able to just save those out as images straight away and share them with everybody else, quite useful. Being at those art programs I was talking about earlier, when you're doing product design or maybe like environmental architecture or something, but being able to be inside that space together and do that together. So drawing on the same, literally the same model on the same car at the same time, and iterating together. Of course, there's potential for actual full simulation of your product. You can test it out in all sorts of different ways, see how it fails, see how it succeeds. It's something you'll probably be just doing, hopefully anyway, when you're testing your product, not just physically testing. But also like being able to actually take that then and show that to as many people as you can give the VR experience to, like no matter where they are in the world. So rather than having to ship them a prototype, you could potentially ship them a virtual experience of using that prototype and see how they use it. You can record their hand data, you can record their eyes, you can record their head movements. You could also potentially, obviously then, there's no reason why you can't just show your product then and demonstrate that to investors. If you've got, say, a hotel chain with a very particular feel or something, and you want to show investors in China or something about that hotel chain, how are you going to do that other than trying to show them videos and pictures? How about you let them come into your hotel? How about you let them explore your hotel? Like see how the staff, like you have your literal, like your actual staff come in virtual reality and act as they normally would and check them in as they normally would, and that's so they can experience how your hotel staff are completely different to other hotel staff or something, and you can demonstrate your product to investors basically, and of course then you potentially go a step further and then release that experience to the public. Be able to market your product or experience to everybody else, to your consumer. For example, Aldi did this by allowing you to virtually test drive one of their cars. At the moment, test driving cars is probably not much of a thing, or shouldn't be much of a thing. So how can they possibly allow people to wish that dream of like, when this all is over, how can I buy this thing? How can I buy this product? So hey, you've tried the 360 experience, you've tried that virtual reality experience, you've driven it physically yourself, you know how awesome this is. So they will just go out there and get it, or even just order one online if you're lucky. I'm gonna finish up now with a Q&A. Obviously that's been quite a lot of stuff. So I've gone through like the different possible uses, what makes basically good VR, how you could possibly get your hands on it, and then some of the use cases directly that we've done. I'm going to first, let's see, come up with some of these questions and answers. So do feel free to post some of these questions and answers. The first one is from Tom, and he says, what do you think are some hardware limitations with virtual technology in 2020? Well, the biggest limitation in terms of hardware is basically the cost. It's still quite expensive for a lot of people. There are a lot more headsets out there. Like when originally this was all launched, there was about like 150,000 headsets. After about 6 months, there's like 1 million headsets. And now PlayStation VR has got like 5 or 6 million or something, and there's been well over a few million of the new headset for Valve that have just released. So in terms of actual limitations of the hardware, cost is definitely a big thing. In terms of like hardware limitations, really it comes down to that balance of wired PC versus unwired, like freedom of movement with Android devices. You can get wireless 5G devices, I see that one, 5G devices for the PC headsets to make them wireless, but they still don't feel quite as good as just running it on a cable. And that cable can be frustrating for a few people. Like it does take a little bit of time to potentially just like wrangle it as you're sort of playing. Depends how much movement you're doing. So I don't know if that really helped. But also the size and scales of them as well. So you saw the difference there between like the Vive Focus. Wow, it's really early. There you go. The Vive Focus, which is like one of the first, in fact, was the first standalone 6 degrees of freedom headset, which means it detected your position as well as rotation. And I mean, it's a big and bulky thing. Let me just grab it for size and scale. The size and scale, it is a huge thing. Like yeah, it's heavy and it's like weirdly lopsided. And then the Oculus Quest, just already so much smaller, fits so much better, much less big plastic. But there's a few years between these. Whereas you saw with the Photon, like the next one, I mean, they're basically just elaborate glasses. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, cool, done. Do you think it's inevitable that VR headsets will become a stable piece of tech in the home? I feel like with all technology, it does take a long time for that to potentially catch up. Like we've had mobile phones for a long time. It was a good few years before they started becoming quite the norm. And it really wasn't until we had like smart ones, and even then, not even just smart ones, like smartphones have been around for ages before the first iPhone. And then like when it started to become like an acceptable price with acceptable amount of shine and user friendliness, then suddenly it all sort of kicked off. But everyone thinks like smartphones, like, oh, the iPhone came out and it was huge. Yeah, because there was so much before that. And we're still, like, we literally just started to kick off now. Like the Oculus Quest is so popular, it is continuously sold out. They literally can't make them fast enough. Same as the Valve Index, like God knows how much that is on eBay at the moment. Like it is so insanely popular, they literally can't make them fast enough. So it's still going to be with balance of everyone else. In terms of gaming, it's not going to be the only way that people game. People still game on their smartphones despite having PlayStation 4s or ridiculous PCs. People still read books despite having movies. It's just going to be an alternative medium. And I feel it will get more persuasive. It is obviously getting more, there's more coming out at the moment, you know. but it's still that sort of that price is like, basically it's like if you still keep getting that price down and down, more and more people will start coming up. So there is going to be a crossover point where basically we say it's a staple now that we expect people to have them, but I don't think it's going to be for a while. And some tech still does die off, like 3D TVs didn't get anywhere, but we'll pass that stage now. Like VR is definitely around. VR is definitely staying. It is way too crucial for business to business and training and education and healthcare. And it always has been. Like it's not like it disappeared from its first sort of time poking up in the 90s. Like the army has been using VR since forever to be doing training. So it more and more in the home. Yeah, it's going to be, will be. It's doing well. What sectors do you think would be most impacted by real-time technology? I think gaming's one thing, but like the biggest one is training. Just that, like the amount of effort you have to go to make someone feel like they're actually trying to be in a real simulation, like they're so expensive. Like the setups they have to teach people how to drive a train are so ludicrously expensive. Like completely custom hardware, big surround screens. You basically need someone there, like looking over you, and just stupidly expensive. And again, like in firefighting, like in training surgery, you basically need dead people to train on. Like it's not scalable, and certainly something you can't do at home. So the biggest industry to be impacted by real-time VR technology is definitely training. And so if you're at all do training with your own employees, or if you offer training as part of your business, you should be completely trying to see what VR can do for you, because it's so critically important for your industry. How do you think 5G will change VR? So I should explain that 5G technology basically it's just it's a slightly different frequency to that we normally use for 4G, and again for 3G and for 2G. As we have gone higher frequency, we can basically get more data, more throughput, faster, easier. It allows data to be transferred really quickly. Its downside, which nobody seems to really talk about, is basically stopped by glass, effectively. Like there are this is the reason, by the way, where your microwave can stop the microwaves from coming out of the microwave, is because it can be stopped really easy by small bits of surface like metals and things. So in terms of 5G, it can be stopped really quickly and easily. So the way that 5G is useful is when you've got basically an antenna effectively in your room and a thing to receive the signal effectively in your room. Like trying to do this outside to inside stuff is not going to work out too well, and we're going to have antennas everywhere. So you basically just need line of sight. And so where it is being potentially useful is where you do have wireless PC headsets, or at least adapters for the PC headsets. So you have a 5G transmitter from your computer. You stick it somewhere where it's clean and obvious, so that it has good line of sight to your headset, and then your headset has a big 5G receiver on the top of it, and it receives the image. And remember, it has to go back the other way as well. So the image can come in, but my headset movements basically normally go over USB. They need to go back out to the PC. So that's where 5G technology could be really useful for VR. In terms of, it's basically allowing ridiculous high quality PC experiences to be streamed out to one or more VR headsets. Do you think real-time VR has useful applications for health and well-being, especially out for pandemic? Well, I especially hope that we're doing that with the NHS project. Like, I think we'll be falling down if that isn't the case. It is going to be properly tested, clinically tested and things, so we'll find out. But it is already being used for, I think, I can't remember how many years ago now, but there has been a few VR experiences that have been clinically tested already and proven to help with things like therapy, things like physiotherapy, exposure therapy. So that's there was a great one that I actually know the developer of, where he created an experience to help with the phobia of spiders. So you start off with a tiny spider that was in VR. You had control to, I guess, kill, I don't know. And then you got bigger and bigger spiders until you could have like literally giant spiders. And now suddenly in VR, like you're coming off building size spiders, and yet in real life you don't. So it's like, oh yeah, that's fine, that's just a tiny spider. It's not as bad as the giant house-sized spider that I had in virtual reality. So yeah, it is already being used for health and well-being. There was a great write-up about there was a VR experience. It's a bit like Beat Saber, which is a really popular VR experience, which is a rhythm game where you have like blocks coming towards you, and you have lightsabers, and you have to like slice the box with the music, time the music. If you remember Dance Dance Revolution or the Dance Dance games, it's basically like that, but with your arms and your whole body. So you have to really move yourself around, which is great for exercise. It is knackering to play. It really builds up the sweat. We're looking at the same sort of, I guess, physical activity. So like Unseen Diplomacy 2 and Unseen Diplomacy very much are like physical sort of courses that you have to actually do. Which obviously, like, you being out, like actually having physical exercise within your house is great, and being a game, it really makes you like compelled to keep trying and keep getting yourself improving, self-improvement and things like that, and really reward you for doing so. And so hopefully we're encouraging you to do lots of exercise, and like be good. And then there's of course the fact that in the same way that the NHS one that we're working on at the moment is giving you, especially the current pandemic where we are locked within potentially our houses, maybe we're not all as lucky to live down here, we live in London and things where you cannot go out, like you're stuck in potentially even a shared room. Like, I even sent my sister a headset because even though she's like a nurse in London, dealing with the whole COVID pandemic in exactly the wrong place at the wrong time, I guess. So like I sent her a headset because I knew that it would give her the chance to be anywhere, do anything that she wanted to do, giving her the chance to just experience things outside that mental prison that she's been locked into by everybody else. So like, you know, getting away from her thoughts of the day, being stuck inside the same room, and then also getting to meet her partner in VR as well, because she's, you know, trying to stay away from a partner at the moment because someone's here to get it. So like they can still go somewhere together, enjoy a beach together, or play games together, or watch a movie together. Literally, you can sit and watch Netflix together. You know, Netflix app. There's a cinema, virtual cinema, whatever size screen you want. You'll sit down, you'll watch together. You literally fake popcorn or whatever, or real popcorn while you're in VR. So having like VR at the moment in this pandemic is really helping her and really helping us as well. So, and that's just from a consumer perspective and isn't just from a business perspective. So hopefully that's helped in that.
Brilliant.
Ooh.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Right.
It feels more pertinent than ever at the moment, and I think that that was a really great overview of all of the potential applications and a lot of food for thought. I'm sure Katie's details are on screen at the moment if anyone wants to get in touch with her about potential projects, and we've also got some one-to-one sessions with her later in the year in November, where you'll be able to discuss some projects in depth with her and have a bit of her time for free. But yeah, really sorry that we're not in a room, because I'm sure there'd be a round of applause at the moment and lots of conversations happening. But thank you to everyone for logging on. There will be a short survey that goes out about the webinar and how you found it. So we'd really appreciate if you filled that in. And if you have any other ideas of immersive technology or virtual reality projects or training that you'd like to see us do, please do get in touch, because we're always looking to make the sessions as relevant as possible. So thank you very much, Katie. And people are saying that they're clapping. So thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.